Welcome back to the podcast, episode 7 of kind of the career pipeline. When I wrapped up the last time, finished up the trip to Afghanistan, the deployment to Afghanistan, came home. I was only home for a couple of months, and I was on a plane back to Iraq. Before you leave country, generally, and I can't remember if they did it that early on, but they generally give you a lot of briefings about, hey, when you go back home, don't try to take over, and your wife's been running the show. And, you don't step into that role. It's very crucial in military families that the spouse runs all the finances and runs the show, especially in the special forces world, because we were gone a lot. So military spouses really do have to step up and take charge and take control of everything. And the last thing they want you to do is come back and stick your nose in there and try to change things. So I don't think I did that. My wife might disagree, but came back. I had 4 kids at this point. My daughter had been born like a month before I deployed, so I really did not see much of her. And then when I came back, I was just back for a couple of months. So when we came back, we took some time off, and then we went out to Mid-South Shooting Academy out in Tennessee, I think it is. We shot there for a couple of weeks, and then we went down to Florida. We went to Griffin Group. We did defensive driving, a bunch of other training down there. And in that time, I actually got sent to Area 51 in Nevada to do a drone pilot's course on the Raven. So I went out there and flew the Raven. A weird place. Like, we weren't on the base, the Area 51 base, but we were on the property. And everywhere we went when we were out flying the thing, we had Department of Energy guys watching us. Guys in big camouflage pickup trucks with beards sitting up on the hill overwatching us. We weren't allowed to get off the road anywhere because there'd been nuclear tests out there. They actually brought us to a nuclear detonation, underground nuclear detonation place. So it was pretty cool, but learned how to fly that Raven. And we were keyed up to go to Chad to do a JSOC, like a training mission with the army there. And it would have been an opportunity for me to speak French, but in the end, very, very close to when we were supposed to go, they pulled the plug and sent us to Iraq instead. So we had left our vehicles in Afghanistan, and other units would fall in on them, so we had to draw new vehicles and then prep the vehicles. Now, prepping a vehicle for Iraq is different than prepping it for Afghanistan, especially if you're going to be in the city. And in Afghanistan, you carried a lot of fuel, you carried a lot of water, you carried a lot of food and ammo and all that. In a city, you're pretty close to a base, and the last thing you want is fuel all attached to the outside of your vehicle when you hit an IED. You're helping the IED. So we reconfigured our vehicles, but they were not armored. They were still ground mobility vehicles, and we were rolling into a city, and that became a huge problem that had to get fixed. We did our train up, and we prepped to roll, and I think in about, I got it back from Afghanistan before Christmas, and then I think in April we launched to Mosul, and I spent 9 months in Mosul through the rest of 2005, over Christmas and into 2006, and I actually spent the next 3 years, I spent like 2 of them in Iraq out of 3. So out to Iraq, out to Mosul. And at this point, the war had not hit its peak. The invasion was 2003. I was on the Q course, missed that. Afghanistan 2004. And we rolled in, a lot of us rolled in to try to and the surge had not happened yet. That didn't happen until 2007, but we were pushing a lot of troops into Iraq. And I remember getting briefed on the ground by General Casey. And he said, the next 6 months is crucial. We're going to make or break this thing and blah, 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 blah. Now, we were trying to rebuild the Iraqi army after we had decimated it. And, a lot of you are probably too young to remember, but once the invasion happened and the looting started, and we let people loot all the arms bunkers for all the rockets and artillery rounds and explosives and guns and bullets, which were used to attack us for years and years and years. Once we started rebuilding the Iraqi army, that's why we were sent there. We were sent there to rebuild a battalion of Iraqi infantry. So We were living on a base inside a big, massive base in Mosul. And right before we got there, a suicide bomber had detonated a suicide vest inside the American chow hall and killed a bunch of people. So the base was pretty on edge. So we got there. We ended up staying in a place called Mariah's, and inside a small prison that was inside a bigger base, and that's where we operated out of. And again, it was not as classic a mission as Afghanistan, but it was a very special forces mission. Go in, train, equip, advise, and accompany this Iraqi army on missions. So they had their own intelligence cell, and they were rebuilding the army. Now, a lot of these guys had been in the army for Saddam. Like, they told me stories of doing raids in Sadr City, and Saddam's policy was every house gets one hand grenade, right? The one guy told me actually he was on a checkpoint one time, and one of Saddam's sons pulled up. I don't know if it's Uday or Qusay, the crazy one, and the crazier one. He had a woman in the car with him, and she had a low cut dress on, and he looked briefly, and Uday, I think it was, saw him and took a pistol out and shot him in the leg and drove away. So at the time, the invasion of Iraq, I remember people talking about it before it happened, and they were like, "Oh, we should do this and this and this." And in hindsight, it was a mistake, right? I think it was a mistake. I think the invasion of Afghanistan was justified. I think it was executed poorly afterwards, but the invasion of Iraq, it didn't make a lot of sense. Saddam was not really doing a lot to support international terrorism, and the whole line about weapons of mass destruction turned out to be fake. Now, whether the administration knew it was fake and pushed it anyway, or they actually believed the intel, because intel is not an exact science, remains to be seen. And I remember at the time, this country is so politically divided. It doesn't matter what one administration does, the other one's going to disagree vehemently about it. So I remember all the discussion about, Cheney and KBR, Kellogg Brown Root, and making millions and millions of dollars and this and that and the other. And at the time, I kind of dismissed it, but there was probably more to it than I believe there was at the time. And rolling into a country like that and invading it and taking it over is the easy part. Maintaining and getting out is the hard part, obviously, and it proved to be the hard part. In the end, we actually won the war in Iraq eventually, after spilling a lot of blood and pouring a lot of treasure into that country, and then we pulled out and we let ISIS roll back in. So anyway, we're not there yet. So when we got to Iraq in 2005, we were given this big speech about how this is going to make, in the next 6 months, we're going to make or break this thing. We're going to rebuild the Iraqi army, and insurgent attacks were happening, but they hadn't ramped up to the scale they were in 2006 and 2007. They were happening a lot. And I was in Mosul, and there was a lot of IEDs in Mosul, and a lot of vehicle-borne IEDs were on the rise. Now, when I got there, we were still sending guys down into the town in civilian clothes to pick up sources and debrief these sources to get intel. And 10th Group, we took over from 10th Group, who were ahead of us, and they had been doing it. Now, we did it for a couple of months, and then we never did it again because it just got too dangerous. But I remember a 10th Group telling us that he was down, and you're talking about guys, SF guys with beards and man dresses and kitted out like locals with an interpreter with them in the city, picking up sources and driving around. Now, that's extremely dangerous because when that source turns on you, you have no armor. You might have soft armor underneath your man dress. You might have some bulletproof vest built into the doors, but you don't have much. You're not going to last long. But he was down there one time, and with a Terp and another guy, and they came. It was getting near curfew, and they came around a corner, and a striker, a big American armored vehicle, came up over the hill and hit him, boom, and spun them out. And they end up crashed against the side of the ditch, dazed and confused. And he was telling me that when he woke up, he looked over and the ramp was coming down the striker, and these kids were coming running out with machine guns. And I tell you, that became a very, very dangerous scenario if you were operating and you ran into the regular army. One of our guys later on in '07 was killed by friendly fire from the regular army on a hit. But and it's not just rolling around civilian cars, it's sniper operations. If you're in a sniper operation and you're in a OP, the most scariest thing you can see is an Apache helicopter who sees a heat signature. It's very, very, and you can do all the coordinations you want, but that becomes the biggest threat to you in some cases. It's friendly fire. It's horrendous. So we were doing that too. So we took over that role, and it wasn't me, but we had guys trained for that, and they would go out in civilian corps, and we would back them up, and they would pick up sources, bring them on post, debrief them, and so we were gathering and building our own intel. We were using the Iraqi intel machine as well within the Iraqi army. And there was one guy who was their intelligence officer, and he'd been an intelligence officer for Saddam Hussein. And he probably was not a nice guy. And I seen him interrogate people, and he sat down really close and he whispered in their ear, and they'd spill their guts. So they kind of knew things about this guy, I think, because he was very soft-spoken, but he could get results. So we started building this Iraqi army back up. Now, at this point, everything was being paid for by the American government. So pouring billions and billions of dollars in, and we were paying all the soldiers and paying them well. But it was getting filtered through their chain of command. And again, Iraq, one of the capitals of corruption of the world. Middle East, corruption is very, very prevalent in the Middle East. And we would pay the chain of command, and it would get filtered down to all the soldiers. Now, a lot of money was probably getting stolen on the way down. I didn't see that, but I'm sure it was. But it was really, really comical, because let's say you had Alpha Company, Bravo Company, Charlie Company, and you'd train Alpha Company for 2 weeks and do missions with them in the evening, and then they would go do their thing, and I can't remember the timeline rotation, and then Bravo Company come in, you'd be standing there looking, and you'd see some of the same faces, and the same thing when Charlie come in, it'd be all the same guys. So they were building up their numbers in order to get paid by the American government for 400 troops when they had 200, and they just kept recycling them back and around again and again. And then what you do is you would get AK-47s for them and ammo and all that, and truckloads of new AKs would show up, and you'd issue them all out. And they took their AK-47 home because they were in very, very grave danger once they left the base. Al-Qaeda would kill them if they found out they were in the Iraqi army. But they'd go home on leave, or they'd go home for the weekend, and they'd come back on Monday, and they'd have a piece of crap AK-47 that they had at home. It was falling apart because they sold the good one that we gave them. So this is what you're up against. But we did what we did. And we started training them from basics. And even though a lot of them had been in the army before, they really didn't know anything. So we started building them up and teaching them combatives, teaching them, shooting on the range a lot. Pistol, machine guns, AKs, doing CQB with them. Trying to teach the command structure, how to plan, and then we would go do hits and we'd operate with them. In Afghanistan, when we rolled at night, we rolled with white lights on because we couldn't use our night vision goggles because the Indians didn't have them. It was the same in the Iraqi army. They didn't have night vision goggles. So everywhere we rolled, we did day hits, we did night hits, we rolled with white lights and lit up like a Christmas tree. And even though there was a curfew, it still doesn't matter, right? The bad guys don't care. And we had no air ops over it. Later on, when I worked with JSOC, we always had a Spectre gunship over our head, which is super reassuring. But at that time, we had nothing. And even if you were in combat and in contact, you may or may not get air depending on what's going on. So as you're rolling around this city with like 1 million people in it, you are looking for threats. So being in the turret of let me back up a little bit. So we had soft skin vehicles. So at that time, everybody started improvising and bolting armor to their vehicles. And we did the same. Later on, armor packages come in, but initially it was like Mad Max. Every piece of armor, every piece of steel that could be found was bolted on the thing because IEDs were decimating us. And there was a press conference at the time, and Rumsfeld, who was the SecDef, said, you go to war with the army you have. And he was absolutely right. He got crucified for it, but he was absolutely right. You go to war with the army you have. But we put so much armor on our Humvees that we crushed the engines, the transmissions failed, the vehicles could. You're grossly exceeding the the weight allowance of the vehicle. So we had massive problems. We ended up getting these armor packages and posting them in, and we got armored Humvees eventually, but initially we didn't. When you're in the turret of that Humvee in a city where there's IEDs everywhere and there's vehicle-borne IEDs, which one of the tactics they use was they'd pack a car with explosives, and as you're driving down in the main city, a car would be coming in the opposite direction. He'd just jump the median, crash into you, and detonate a bomb. So you develop this imaginary bubble around your vehicle, I say 50 yards out, and anybody comes within that bubble is getting shot, right? Now, the problem is other units, and there was a lot of MPs rolling around, and they allowed people to get a whole lot closer than we did. And they were not as aggressive as us. So the people in the city got used to driving closer to vehicles than they should have. Now we use visible green lasers to keep them away. That kind of worked a little bit. I did fire warning shots, even though it's not recommended and it usually does not help. But I've been in the vehicle where somebody drives and you develop this kind of sixth sense. I suspected it wasn't an IED, and this car was just getting closer and closer, and I fired a shot over the top of it. They turned away, they were shocked, and there was a woman and a couple of kids in the car. And even though you don't want to open fire into a car with women and kids in it. I mean, my God, you really want to carry that? But you can't hesitate. So it becomes a very difficult decision process, and it's split-second decision process to be able to send a 50 cal round into a vehicle. That's 670 grains that will just decimate a soft-skinned vehicle. I remember one time we were on a hit, and we had an outer cordon with the Iraqi army, and it was a daylight hit. We were hitting targets, and for some reason, they let a car through the outer cordon. So it comes barreling down the road right towards us, and we had a gun truck there. There was a 50 cal on it, and there was 4 of us on the ground, and it was like an up drill on the range. We all simultaneously just raised our M4s and opened fire into the car, and the 50 cal opened fire into the car. And when the car stopped abruptly, me and the medic went up there, and these guys were shot. There was 3 guys in the car, and they were shot to pieces. And our medic started treating them a little bit, and we pulled the worst 1 or 2 out and put them in our vehicle and took them to the hospital and tried to save their lives. But the Iraqi army letting them through the outer cordon. Now, I don't talk a lot of specifics about combat because people are so freaking judgy, right? It's hard to imagine why you would do that. But if you hesitate, like we all opened fire at the same time, if we hesitated another 5 seconds, and that was a VBEL, a vehicle-borne IED, and that guy detonated that, he would have killed us all, right? So you have a tiny, tiny window to make a decision and live with that decision. And it's very easy to sit back today and judge that decision. So, very difficult job to be in a turret in a city like Mosul or Baghdad when you have hundreds of IEDs every day and you're trying to watch everything and you're trying to see everything. We end up, with strikers and battening down hatches and using crow systems, but there's a strong case for being out of the hatch because it gives you better situational awareness, and there's a strong case for being buttoned up because it gives you better protection, right? But you take away from one, you give it to the other. At the time, I have some photos posted on my Instagram. I have a chest-mounted pistol, a Glock, and the reason I have a chest-mounted is in the turret. If something comes up really close and I need to reach for that pistol, I don't want to be reaching to my hip. I want to have it up here nice and high so I can get to it. And the other part of that is when you're in the turret, if the vehicle rolls and you don't drop down quickly, you'll be cut in half. And if you have stuff around your waist, it restricts your ability to drop down into that vehicle quickly. And that's why I had a chest-mounted pistol for a lot of that rotation. We wore chocolate chip uniforms too because that's what our Indige wore. We We did a lot of training with them. We did a lot of hits. Our intel was hit or miss. It wasn't great. We also we had a sniper operating, Al Qaeda sniper operating in Mosul during that time who'd shot a bunch of Americans. He was shooting from a vehicle. We did Connor sniper operations in that. They sent SEAL snipers in to do counter sniper stuff. And they actually came to our base and they're like, we don't know what the hell we're doing here. And I'm not talking crap about them. It's very difficult. You don't get trained on counter sniper ops in sniper school. And if you do, it's very enemy at the gates BS, right? Oh, you look for curtains moving and you look for, changes and this and that. There's freaking million people in the city. There are a lot of curtains moving. There are a lot of things happening. The best way to get a sniper in that scenario is to pour a lot of money into intel and try to get somebody to rat his ass out and hit him up at nighttime when he's asleep. Right? But in a city like that, shooting from a car is very, very difficult to pinpoint. The IRA did the same thing in the 80s from a car. So we did a bunch of counter sniper operations. The SEALs went out and they went on rooftops and stuff. And when you're on a rooftop, you see other rooftops. You really don't. It doesn't help for the streets. And it really didn't gain anything at that. I remember one time we were out and we had Indage, right? So we had a bunch of locals in civilian clothes and cars running in vehicles that could blend. And one of our guys was maintaining combo with them from the back of the striker. So he was dressed like a regular army guy and he's up on the striker. And the striker, the hatch opens at the back and you can put two guys up and they're exposed, but they have good situational awareness. And he was up there with an M4, with an army guy with an M4, and they were running the Indage and they were around the city all day, and they were coming back in, and they were almost at the gate, and the army guy that was with him, he kind of jumped and he said, "Oh, I had a negligent discharge." He thought his gun went off because he felt this movement, and he looked down and the dust cover was closed, and what happened was the sniper hit his gun with a bullet. The sniper shot at him and it struck his M4 while he was carrying it at the ready on the way back in the gate on a counter sniper op. You can't make this crap up. I was at a briefing once with the army that owned the battle space that we operated in, and it was the S3, the battalion commander. He was like, "Look, you're not supposed to be writing stuff on your helmet, but I know guys do. But here's two examples." And he put up one, and it said, "Snipe this," and there was a bullet hole through it. The sniper had shot him on the helmet. And then he put another one up and there was a target drawn on the helmet and the sniper had shot at him as well. He was like, "I'm not telling you not to do it, but I wouldn't do it." A sniper is a very, very psychological weapon because if you don't know when he's going to strike and you don't know where he's going to strike, you're constantly on alert and it will wear your ass down after a while. That's why it's such an effective tool. And it wasn't just Mosul. They used them in a bunch of different places. And those guys were rolled up eventually. And one of my buddies actually, when we were in JSOC in the SIF company in 2006, they rolled up with the Iraqi counter-terrorist sniper force. They rolled up as a sniper on a mission. But the Iraqi army, again, that culture, that Middle Eastern culture, it's very, very negative reinforcement does not work. It's very coaxing and nurturing and, hey, we're all here together and we're all team together. And I was on the range one day teaching pistol, and there was an officer there, and he couldn't hit the side of a barn. He was terrible, and he was blaming everything, blaming the pistol, blaming the ammo, blaming the sun, and it was too hot. And he had a Browning Hyper, and I took it from him, and I shot like 10 rounds, like center mass, like nice group. And I embarrassed him in front of his soldiers, and I shouldn't have done that. That was wrong. Later on, he was probably trying to save face, but I was down the line working with another soldier or whatever. I looked up and he had a private walk down range and hold a cigarette up in his hand, and he was trying to shoot the cigarette out of his hand with one hand. I stopped it. I didn't let him shoot. I caught it on time. But that's that culture. It was a strange thing to observe. Last time when I talked about Afghanistan, I talked about being this guy stealing money from the op fund, right? Well, we still had the same op fund in Iraq. And there's things you can buy and things you can't buy, and there's some manipulation that goes on there. I remember being in the briefing because this time there's two guys involved in operation fundings. There's the paying agent and the field ordering agent. I can't remember which is which, but so I did not want to be this. I didn't want nothing to do with money. And beware of the guy who volunteers to be the money guy because he's probably shady. I didn't want nothing to do with it, but I was forced to go do it. Probably because I was trustworthy. But so I go and I get the briefing. And I remember in the briefing, there was a bunch of regular army people there. And there was a infantry unit that was out in Anbar province. And they were in the desert doing a lot of stuff. And they wanted to buy ice to put in their coolers to keep their bottled water cold in the desert. And the guy giving the brief was like, can't buy ice. And the reason you couldn't buy ice is because they didn't want people putting it in drinks because it's non-potable and getting sick. So that's a hard and fast rule. But this guy didn't want to drink it. He just wanted to put it in the coolers. And they were like, can't buy ice, can't buy ice, can't buy ice. And one of the guys on my team in a break said, hey, call it wood, right? Call it something else. And the officer didn't get it. And what the guy meant by saying that is, look, if it's for mission accomplishment and you're kind of working in a gray area just to get the mission done, then that might be something you want to consider, right? Now, you're still going to get hammered for it, but if you can look yourself in the mirror, if you can stand in front of your battalion commander and say, yep, I did that, I do it again because I was trying to accomplish the mission and get around your ridiculous rules, right? So this time I was one of the two guys who put his name on that piece of paper. And the other guy had run up fund in Afghanistan the year before. And he was a lot looser with the rules than I was. But I was balls deep in training the Iraqi army, and that's what I was there to do. And I was working my ass off 18 hours a day doing it. And the first time he came with a document for me to sign, I questioned it and scrutinized it, and he was buying shit he shouldn't have done. And I signed the document like a jackass, and I shouldn't have. And I was like, I wasn't comfortable with it, but I didn't listen to that little voice in the back of my head, and he talked me into it, and I should have known better. It was my own fucking fault. I should have known better. And now, boom, 15-6 investigation. And we were a third group working for a fifth group kind of headquarters. Excuse me. So they were out to make an example of us because we were spending money on stuff we shouldn't have spent money on. And they started a 15-6 investigation. And they came down. I remember the day they came down. They sent a warrant officer down. And he came in and he read us our rights. And I went to explain, and my warrant officer stopped me. My warrant officer was actually very experienced, a very smart guy. He'd been around a long time. And he stopped me. I went to explain because your natural instinct is to explain, but he was like, stop, we want a lawyer. And he said, anytime you read your rights, get a lawyer. And so we got a lawyer, and we talked to him. We did this and this and this. It went on for about 2 or 3 weeks. And you could tell me now or back then that, hey, we're going to hit this target and there's 100 foreign fighters on it, heavily armed, and it's going to be brutal. And I would be so excited. I'd be into that. That'd be like, oh my God, this is awesome. But you tell me I'm under investigation for misappropriation of funds, and my reputation is on the line, and I have to pay back this money, and it's just, I couldn't eat. I couldn't sleep for like 2-3 weeks. I lost weight. I was so freaking stressed out. It put years on me. I hate that crap. I absolutely hate it. In the end, it went away. They could have hammered us because we were wrong. But it went away, but it was the shot over the bow that I needed. And I was like, never again. And I mentioned last time, when I was a team sergeant, not a dime got spent unless I knew about it. Now, there were certain things I was willing to play with, but my standard was no personal gain. And it's for mission accomplishment, and I will stand in front of the group commander and say, yes, I did that, and I do it again because I had to do it to accomplish my mission, right? And we talk about that more later. That was that was a hard couple of weeks with that shit hanging over me, and I will never, ever, ever. I'm a pretty honest guy, and I would never, ever, ever go down that road again. But I knew better, and I used to tell when I ran the Warrior Leader course for young staff NCOs, I would tell them that when the music stops, you're the one without a chair. Don't ever do it. Okay. missions we used on that one, we'd flood the place with a company of Iraqi soldiers, and we would just dominate it. And if the enemy want to come fight, let them come fight. I got 100 guns with me. Bring it on, right? We did hit some rural targets. We hit mostly targets in the city, and we tried to build up. So we'd work with one company for a couple of weeks, and we'd teach them all this stuff, and then we'd hit targets at night, and then we'd move them out to work independently, and we'd bring in the next company. We'd work with them for a couple of weeks and bring them, and then we'd move them aside, and then we'd start with the next company. We'd do that, and we did that for 9 months. We were done with our whole mission. We had the whole battalion trained and operating independently by December. So we're like, oh man, we're going to make it home for Christmas. But they kept us there till January because they had to keep a certain number of ODAs in the country for some BS reason. It was weird. But bringing up an army and trying to teach them everything is weird. We were doing all the breaching, right? Shotgun breaching, mechanical breaching, which is, sledgehammers and hooly tools, and ballistic breaching with shotguns, and explosive breaching with det cord. Later on in JSOC we had explosive cut and tape. We had proper breaching hat and rounds and stuff, but it was double odd buck and a det cord for breaching back then. But I was like, I'm going to teach these guys how to shotgun breach. And they didn't have any shotguns. And I went to the captured weapons facility, and I found like 10 shotguns that had been confiscated, and they were just breech-loaded single-shot shotguns. And I was like, these will do. And I took them back, and I cut the barrels off, and I cut the buttstock off, and I made these little short single-shot breaching shotguns. I was like, this will freaking work. And I have them out training one day, and they're deathly scared of these things. And I'm like, come on, man, it's not a big deal. So I take one, I load it, and I shoot it into the ground. I'm like, not a big deal. So I'm like, okay, I'm going to prove a point here. And I end up proving a point, but not the one I wanted to prove. I picked the smallest guy I could find. And I said, come up here. And he was scared, you could tell. I loaded the gun. I'm like, just shoot it into the ground. And when he fired the shotgun, it recoiled back and hit him in the face and busted his nose open. And that was it. They would not touch the shotgun ever again. They were done. They're like, nope, not doing it. And they would just say that. It wasn't like you could discipline them. They'd just be like, I'm not doing that. I'm not touching that. All in all, a kind of weird trip. The team I was on, I was not a good fit for. I was not aligned with what they did. And I was a little frustrated. I was actually looking for a way out. The warrant officer was squared away, but that was about it. I remember sitting down with the warrant. Actually, it's an interesting conversation. I remember sitting down with the warrant early on the trip and talking about getting killed, right? Nobody ever talks about this. And he said, look, here's how I think about it. I've had a good life. If I get killed, I get killed. If you have to think about it that way, and then you just roll up and do your job. Because if you're worried about getting killed, or you're worried about getting shot or blown up, it's very hard to function in a extremely dangerous environment like that. So it kind of became, and before that I didn't really think about it, honestly, but it kind of became how I thought about things. It's almost like, hey, it's destiny, right? If I'm going to get killed, I'm going to get killed. If I'm not, I'm not. And I've had bullets fly right past my head, and I've had IEDs go off and very close to me, and vehicles get hit and all kinds of stuff. And I just figured, look, if it's my time, it's my time. And this is the road I chose, and it is what it is. So that's kind of how I framed it from then on. We had a good working relationship with the infantry unit that owned the battle space. They kind of utilized it. And it's funny because when you work for the infantry owned the battle space we operated in, right? It was their battle space. We couldn't do anything without their permission. And you can deal with the infantry in two ways as a special operations guy. You can go in there in civilian clothes with your beard and introduce yourself as Bob or Tom or Kevin, or and you can go in and say, hey, we're soft, we're here to fix it, we're not telling you what we're doing, we're too cool for school, right? That's one way to do it, and they'll tell you to go F yourself and kick you out. Or you can go in there in uniform with all your badges on, and introduce yourself as Sergeant First Class Owens. Sir, I'm here to help. What can we do? And they'll bend over backwards for you. And that's the way you do it. But you get this ego in special operations a lot of times that will not do that. They think they're cool, too cool for school. Guess what? Your uniform says U.S. Army, the same as everybody else. You're not that cool. Do your job. And if you can accomplish your mission and you got to go in and be an Army guy, then be an Army guy. They will not trust you. They will not employ you if they think you're a liability. You want to go out and set up an OP on a sniper overwatch on a IED lane, you got to convince those guys that you're not a loose cannon. It's just going to shoot anybody comes along, right? And you convince the Army and you speak to the Army in Army language. A lot of those Army guys, they don't want this too cool for school guy coming in and with the slick back hair and the beard and talking like he's some sort of cool guy, right? So put a damn uniform on, shave, and go talk to them and say, how can we help? We just want to help. We're all on the same team here, right? And they'll do it. And they were very, very good to work for, and they're very, very good to work with, and they were very, very professional. And I tell you, I've said this before, the soft job, and you know, over the next 3 years, basically, 3 deployments, I was in Iraq, in Baghdad, and Mosul, and doing the mission that SOF did in Iraq was dangerous, but we had a lot of assets and we kind of stacked the deck in our favor. Doing it as an infantry kid who sits in the back of a striker and drives around a city and is a massive target, getting blown up all the time and shot at all the time, it's a much, much tougher job. And those kids did it day in, day out, and I have mad respect for them because it was very, very... The people who took the brunt of that war, and everybody did their part, right? But what I saw mostly in Mosul and in Baghdad on multiple occasions were these kids and strikers, these infantry kids and strikers who were out there all the time on 12-hour shifts in a very difficult circumstance and lost a lot of people. So those guys just crushed it. I left Mosul in January 06. And there was a lot more happened on that trip, and there was a lot more fights and incidents, but I just don't feel comfortable talking about them because a lot of them were jacked up, and I'm not going to dredge that up. So I came back, not happy with the team I was on, kind of looking for a change. And when I came back, our team sergeant changed out. And the guy we got had been away from SF for a long time. He had been a recruiter for a couple of years, and then when he came back to the regiment, he was an instructor at SWIC for a couple of years. So he basically left the regiment an E6 and came back as an E8, and now he's a team sergeant, and he'd never been to combat. And he was on a team with guys who'd been to combat a lot. And had he been a different guy, he would have been fine, but he was a jackass. And he was dangerous, and I knew he ended up getting fired later on. Luckily, he didn't get anybody killed, but I was like, I'm not staying here, I'm out. I got a slot being at Fort Bragg. Range 37 is at Fort Bragg, and Range 37 hosts Sephardic and Sniper School. Sephardic is a 9-week hostage rescue, CQB, breaching, all the cool stuff you want to do when you join the Army in the first place, school. It is set up to feed assaulters to the SIF companies. Okay, now, what's a SIF company? You know, SF's tip of the spear, right? But JSOC is the tip of the spear. So you take JSOC, Joint Special Operations Command, and that consists of Delta Force, SEAL Team 6, Ranger Regiment, and the SIF companies within Special Forces. Now, it's all changed now, but that's what it was back then. And the SIF companies, there's 5 active duty Special Forces groups. Okay, and they're all regionally aligned, blah, blah, blah. The SIF companies, there's 1 SIF company per group, so there's 5 total. And originally they were supposed to be forward deployed. 7th Group SIF Company were in Panama. 10th Group SIF Company in Germany, right? And the idea was if something happened and there was a hostage situation, the SIF companies were already there. They would launch, they'd secure the site, they'd put snipers in place. They'd put the assault team in place in case a hasty assault had to be done while Delta are on a plane flying over, right? There's a whole lot more to it that I'm not going to get into. So the thing about going to a SIF company, you had to have 2 years team time, which I did. You had to be Sephardic qualified, which was hard to get a slot for Sephardic, even at Bragg. So, but they had guys going to Sephardic who couldn't shoot a handgun, right? So they implemented a shooting test at the start of Sephardic, which it stayed there for a while and then it went away. But in the window I went, even if you didn't have a slot, you could go and shoot the test. And I was a really good shot with a handgun. And if you got the required score and somebody with a hard slot didn't, you could take their slot. So I went there and I shot in and I got a slot to Sephardic, which was huge. And I at the time I was still in on a regular team. I wasn't on in a SIF company. So I went to Sephardic for 9 weeks, and that's where I met Mike Glover. We went there at the same time, and we had a great Sephardic class, man. Some awesome dudes that I did a lot of stuff with over the next couple of years. And it's basically 3 or 4 weeks of shooting a pistol, shooting a carbine, CQB, simunitions, live fire CQB, retaking trains, retaking buses, breaching, explosive breaching, ballistic breaching, mechanical breaching, hits, helicopters, hits, freaking over. It's a phenomenal school. I had so much fun at that school. It was awesome. And I learned a lot about CQB and about breaching and all that, and it stood to me the rest of my career. So I got to go to Sephardic. Now, at the time, the SIF companies, which had been pulled into a JSOC role in Iraq, and they were going after high-value targets because basically there were so many targets to hit that Delta couldn't handle it all. So they pulled in all the SIF companies, and we did a rotation. It was mostly the third group, SIF, which was B23, Bravo Company, 2nd Battalion, 3rd Group, and A15, 5th Group, SIF. And then the others would filter in periodically, but a lot of the work was done by 5th Group and 3rd Group. So that they had been in Iraq in 05, and they'd only hit a couple of targets. They hadn't done that much, but that's kind of where the fight was. Everywhere else was very reactionary. That was going after the bad guys and hitting them and stacking the deck and having the assets and honestly having guys left and right of you who really were good at what they did and knew CQB and knew how to fight. And the advantage of being in a SIF company and being under that JSOC umbrella is you got more training ammunition, you got better weapons, you got different trucks, you had a bigger budget for training, and you had just access to better stuff, and you got rolled into this JSOC mission in Iraq, which was freaking phenomenal. So I looked over there and I talked to a guy, and he was telling me about it, and I was like, man, I want to go there. So I went to Sephardic, not saying I wanted to go over there, but when I got back after I graduated Sephardic, I was like, I want to go to SIF company, and my company sergeant major said, no, we need you here. We want you to deploy in this next deployment. And they were going back to Afghanistan, and I was like, screw that. And I went to talk to the company sergeant major, and me and Mike Glover went the same day, actually, to talk to the company sergeant major. And Mike did not have enough team time. He didn't have 2 years. He was shy a couple of months. But Mike's Mike, so he talked him into it. And he said I could come, but he had to get the permission of the battalion commander. So I went and talked to the battalion commander, who was awesome. And he was like, look, if that's where you want to go, I will send you. Because he knew that's where the fight was going to be. And then my company sergeant major was pissed, but hey, I burned that bridge. And I got to go to the SIF company. And when I got there, they were split into 2 troops. And each troop had 3 ODAs. One was a sniper ODA, which are all assaulters as well, and then 2 assault teams, right? And then on both sides. So they sent me to the snipes because I had a sniper background, and I was happy with that. Now, I will say the first team I was on in SF in Iraq and Afghanistan, not a real good fit for me. The team I went to in the SIF company, freaking warriors, man, and guys that are friends to this day. One of them I talked to last night on the phone for like an hour, right? Guys who just wanted to get after it, go hit targets, go do what you do, and had no interest in anything else, had no interest in drinking or partying. They just wanted to go do the job and bring the fight to the enemy. And I was on one of the most senior teams in the group now at this point. Mike wasn't on my team. Mike got in, but he went to an assault team, but we were on the same troop. So we deployed together. As soon as I get in there, we just start training and training and training and training and ramping up to go work with the Iraqi counter-terrorist force in Iraq and Baghdad. Now, the Iraqi counter-terrorist force had been recruited by 5th Group and 3rd Group, had been vetted and pulled out and moved to Jordan for months and trained and equipped. And it wasn't like a half-assed training thing. It was like state-of-the-art weapons, night vision goggles, sniper rifles, everything. And it's one of the biggest successes that special forces have seen since Vietnam, really, because when ISIS invaded Iraq, the Iraqi counter-terrorist force and ISAF brigade were the ones who stood and fought and put a hurting on them and stopped ISIS taking the whole country. All right. When they vetted the Iraqi counter-terrorist force, they were very, very picky and very selective. And these guys were freaking warriors, man. You couldn't really tell them. You'd see them standing there and you'd be like, are they Americans? And, baseball hat on and a dip in. And a lot of them spoke English, both Sunni and Shia, but very, very, very tough warriors, man, who were not afraid to get in the thick of it and had been in the thick of it for years and years and years. So they pulled them out, took them. I wasn't part of that. They took them to Jordan, trained them up, brought them back into country, and then they started aggressively going after Al Qaeda and Shia targets. And Al Qaeda are Sunni, and the Mahdi militia or the Mahdi army were Shia, Sadr City. So that was going to be our mission, and it was super exciting. We got there. The different SR-25s, regular teams didn't have Glocks. Most regular teams didn't have Glocks. Just better equipment, better weapons, better vehicles, better kit, and just a better mindset for the guys who did it. And then everybody, you have to be Sephardic qualified to go there. Everybody on my team was Sephardic qualified. Most people were sniper qualified. I had not been to sniper school in the American Army yet, but I knew what I was doing around sniper stuff. And we trained and trained and trained. And then we launched into Baghdad in 2006 to work with the Iraqi counter-terrorist force. And it was a phenomenal trip. When I got there, we set up. We worked with the ICT after I came there for a couple of weeks, I think 2 weeks, maybe 3 weeks. And then 6 of us got pulled from the troop to go down and work with the emergency response unit of the Baghdad police. And among that 6 was me, Mike Glover, Kent, who was our team leader, who became our XO next year, the year after, and got shot, but survived. And we had a phenomenal group of guys. They had already had SEALs down there working this issue, and they needed help. So 6 of us got pulled out and pushed down to the emergency response unit of the Baghdad police, and that started the 06 trip. And I'll pick that up on the next podcast. And it's going to be a doozy. Okay, guys, appreciate you listening. I do look at your questions when you put them in the comments in the YouTube video and or on Instagram, and I will get to them, and I'll probably do a video and answer as many questions as I can. Before I go, just check out Fieldcraft Training. It's on fieldcraftsurvival.com/training. We've training all over the country, and some phenomenal instructors and some great courses coming up and some changes coming up in the new year. So please check that out and come train with us. I will be running a ballistics class here soon in North Carolina, and I do teach some of the courses personally, but if it's not me, it's somebody much better than me. So come train with us. All right, guys, till next time. Thanks. Bye.